Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the first in a series of webinars on the impact of climate change on sustainable economic development in Latin America and Nicaragua. My name is Joe DiNicola. I will introduce our panelist, Dr. Francisco Mayorga, shortly, but I'd like to take a minute of your time to introduce my organization, Sostenica, the host for this webinar series. Sostenica integrates educational and environmental programs of financial services. This is a holistic approach that's needed to address the root causes of poverty in rural Nicaragua. We've been active there since the 1990s, but launched our comprehensive smallholder farmer development model only 3 years ago. We provide training, consultations, and where and when appropriate, capital to these farm families in Nicaragua. We also manage a clean cook stove program that addresses significant health needs, particularly among women and children, while sharply reducing the carbon footprint and deforestation pressures. We have a school garden program to serve the very smallest of our farmers. And now on to our topic. We are very happy to have Dr. Francisco Mayorga with us this afternoon. Francisco is an economist and writer who specializes in international finance and economic development. He was a governor of the Central Bank of Nicaragua in the 1990s and founded Banco del Café in 1995. He is the author of 2 books on the Nicaraguan economy and has written several novels. In his academic career, he has taught finance for nearly 20 years on the faculty of INCE, the leading management school in the region. He has also served on the board of directors of the Central American Bank for Economic Integration, which is the regional development bank, and more recently on the board of directors of the Inter-American Development Bank. Francisco, the microphone is yours.
Thank you, Joe. Well, thanks to Sostenica for the invitation to share with this audience my views about the challenges that we face, not only in Nicaragua, but in the whole of Central America for the next few years. In fact, you know, the more than 42 million Central American inhabitants are facing several challenges, and I'm going to try to describe them quickly before I go into the Nicaraguan specific situation. I'm trying to move my screen, yeah. We have 3 major regional challenges that are not only regional, but also specific for each of the 4 northern Central American countries, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, and Nicaragua. The first is demographics, the second is technological disruptions, and the third is climate change. Those 3 challenges are so deep, so profound, that they might become like a perfect storm that will be affecting the Central American development and will affecting the lives of millions in Central America over the next 5 years. Demographics have to do with the fact that we have very young populations. Some regions of the world face the same problem. At this moment, in the cohort of 10 to 14-year-olds, we have around 4.3 million young people who will be entering adulthood in the next 5 years. This means, of course, that we will have to create around at least 700,000 jobs per year in the region in the next 5 years. This will exercise a lot of pressure on the labor market. We are going to be facing the challenge of these young people. Some will enter the student population, of course, but many of them will just go directly into the labor force. At the same time, we have this valve of the migration that we have been using for the last 30 years. This escape valve will be closing in the next few years. In fact, they are trying to close it in the United States right now And this is going to imply that the region will be like a kettle under pressure, and that will mean that there will be a lot of social pressure in the region. It is not specific for the countries. It will be, you have to see Central America like a system, and it will be a really systemic social risk. We need to create, as I said, at least some 700,000 new jobs per year. And this is around twice what we have been creating in the last 5 years. So it is a real challenge. Uh, we will need to increase the capital inflows, but it is very doubtful that we will be able to double the capital inflows in the next 5 years. It is very unlikely. So whatever capital inflows we can get, towards which sectors should we address them? That's a key question. We also face the challenge of technological disruption. You all, of course, are familiar with this. We have now entering into industry and other sectors more labor-saving automated processes. We have the advent of small robots that will have an impact on service jobs. We also have the challenge of less jobs creation in manufacturing, especially because the areas of the world that have concentrated manufacturing in the last 30 or 40 years are in Asia, and they are very easily transforming into the automated processes, whereas we are lagging behind. At the same time, we have artificial intelligence substituting many tasks in the service sector. So we have really a net job destruction process in the LDCs in general. Here in the United States, you know that the experts talk about net job creation. They say that some jobs will be destroyed, but others will be created. There is a debate about that in the States and in Europe too. But in the less developed countries, the process is just of net job destruction because new jobs are being created precisely in the areas where you develop these robots and these machines and these softwares. We are not into that yet in many of our countries. So what do we do? What kind of jobs could we create? You see, my own concern is that in the manufacturing sector, we don't have much opportunity. We don't have much opportunity also either in the business sector, in the service sector. We only have a chance in agriculture, really, for the next few years. You see, the jobs threatened as a result of automation, according to the World Bank, a report that was issued in 2016, this means that 57% of the jobs of the OECD might be destroyed in the course of the next 10 to 20 years. Of course, less jobs are in risk in the United States and even less in England, as you can see at the bottom of the table. But in our countries, in this table, you can see in the Dominican Republic, you have 62% of total jobs endangered as a result of automation. In Nicaragua, 65%. In Costa Rica, 68%. And in El Salvador and Guatemala, 75% of our jobs are in danger. So it is very likely that in the course of the next 5, 10, 15 years, we are going to face a challenge that will be additional to the demographic pressure that we face. But additionally, we are facing the challenge of climate change. You see, in Central America, we have what we call the dry Mesoamerican corridor, which really starts in southern Mexico and ends in Costa Rica. You see the yellow area that's shown in the map there in Central America is an area of high degree of drought. And the red areas are estimated to be of severe degrees of drought. But you see, we really have had a climate problem since Adam and Eve because we have a rainy season and a dry season every year. Our dry season used to be 50 years ago, 4 or 5 months as long as much. But in recent years, the dry season has been extending to 5, 6, and even 7 months. And our rainy seasons have become more irregular. We may have the same average rainfall per year, but the rainfall is concentrated sometimes in a few days, sometimes in a few weeks, and over just a few months. And that affects the livings of millions, the livelihoods of millions in the rural areas of our countries. And as you can see, in, in Nicaragua, we have a very extensive area that is affected more and more by climate change. This impacts in Central America 10 million rural poor. They are concentrated in those agricultural areas and they live in very good lands, but those lands have a very low productivity because they get only one food crop per year. They used to get 2 food crops per year 30, 40, 50 years ago. Additionally, we face more frequent floods due to the um, higher appearance of hurricanes in the Caribbean, which hit Central America, of course, at the same time. And our challenge is that we have the impact of climate change in the lives of these millions of rural poor that see their poverty levels increasing, and this also derives into malnutrition. People there, especially the young, decide to migrate in the past overseas, now to the cities, and this also leads to higher insecurity, urban violence, and of course, a higher base for the drug lords who organize drug gangs in order to promote a higher degree of violence, which will allow them to cross our countries more easily as time passes and send the drugs to the drug market in the United States. Now, these three major challenges, creating 700,000 jobs per year, absorbing the impact of automation, and protecting and empowering 10 million poor in Central America, lead to the question, what's to be done? Especially what's to be done in the next few years. We don't have any time to lose. We are lagging in the process. And there is one possible avenue for us to do something very concrete. You see, Nicaragua's productivity in the first 5 years of the current decade was less than half of Guatemala and El Salvador, and about less than 1/3 of Costa Rica. Costa Rica was producing in those years $5,400 per hectare per year, whereas we were producing like $1,800 per hectare per year only. As you can see, you could envision the possibility that Nicaragua could catch up with Honduras in 1 year, maybe two. In Guatemala in 2 years, maybe three. Catch up with El Salvador in 3 years, maybe four. And the challenge would be to catch up with Costa Rica, maybe in 6, 7, 8 years. That's a real possibility for us. You see, the fact that we have good land but little water implies that if we promote irrigation at the small scale, we also need to promote drainage and terrace the lands in order not to continue to lose the soil of good quality that we have there, now especially that we have excessive rainfall that washes away the good soil. If we adopt better practices, and especially if we adopt resilient seeds that are resilient to illnesses, to drought, to fungus, that would mean a real possibility, not only to increase productivity, but also to improve the lives of millions there. So the questions are, what is to be done and how is it to be done? I think that we can perform the water miracle. The water miracle that has taken place in many other places, like Israel or Taiwan. Those are very good examples of what you can do with little water. We have water, however. Water falls from the sky every year. We could harvest that water. We could just create uh, small ponds to capture the water, even smaller ponds to infiltrate that water in the underground. And then we could use that water to irrigate during the drought period. That could allow us to go not only from 1 to 2, but to 3 and even 4 crops per year. I know one example of 10 peasants who went from being poor peasants to rich farmers in just 3 years. This was promoted by Fontagro, a Latin American organization. What they did was to go precisely from 1 to 2 crops to 4 crops per year. But in addition to that, they managed to increase productivity from 15, which was very low, to 45 hundredweight of corn per hectare per crop. And of course, you can see the impact. For a 10-hectare unit, you could go from 150 hundredweights to 1,800 hundredweights. And that would mean, as it meant for those peasants that I know, that would mean a 12-fold increase in family income. That would make a substantial change in the lives of many. That has been done. It could be easily replicated with many peasants, with thousands of peasants. This would create jobs. This would reduce poverty, and this would mitigate, not only mitigate, but maybe even take advantage of the opportunities that climate change brings in this sense. Better practices can be allowed by rotating crops, that this is a textbook case. But also we have to recognize that microclimate varieties require different seeds. You see, seeds can be very sensitive to, to small geographical areas where you have different types of soils and different types of rainfall regime. So if we continue to use the seeds that are produced in the United States by the big companies, those seeds are designed to optimize production for very homogeneous territories. But in the tropics, we have different microclimates and different types of soils. So we really need to use our own seeds. We need to develop better ways to select our seeds, choosing them according not only to higher productivity, but also according to their resilience to humidity, to drought, to insects, to diseases, and to fungi. We have some national centers like Regional Institute of Inter-American, the Institute, the Inter-American International Institute for Agriculture and Fontagro that have done important efforts in the sense of identifying areas, identifying seeds, and so forth. But if we cannot disseminate those seeds, and especially the techniques to select the seeds, we will not achieve much in the process. So how do we do it? We need to organize our rural communities. The rural communities can go from subsistence agriculture to farming if we can help them organize themselves, like in cooperatives, not only in the sense of sharing water, because some farms are more amenable to building ponds than others. Some are too flat and cannot collect water, but others have a land that could allow them to do that. So they could share water. They could also exchange seeds according to the selection process to achieve higher yields. And then we, with more crops and higher yields, these peasants will have access to the marketplace. And that would mean that they would have access to a better income and a better livelihood. You see, I'm focusing on these specific issues: agriculture, water harvest, and better practices. There are a lot of proposals around different issues to confront the challenges of climate change. And there are some prescriptions about good government policies. But you see, good government policies are not enough. We need to do things at the micro level, at the social base level. We need to, you see, the governments may provide roads, electricity, facilitate sometimes infrastructure, but we need financing in reasonable terms for the peasants, and we need technical assistance, which is not only technical, it has to be social assistance in the sense that we should teach them, we could teach them to organize themselves and to help themselves. The circumstances of the past have pushed us into believing that we have to be individualistic, but we really need to work at the community level, helping each other in order to achieve real results. We need organization for mutual support. We need to learn how to share water, how to share seeds, and how to share storage facilities. If we use appropriate technology for small-scale agro-industry, we could add value to the agricultural products, and then we could have very efficient access to the marketplace. So I think that this can be achieved with very small investments. We can have very substantial gains, really, from small investments. And this is the kind of efforts that I have seen that Sostenica has been carrying on for years in Nicaragua. And I think that they have really contributed a lot to the livelihoods of tens of hundreds of peasants, but the size of the challenge is overwhelming. I think that a perfect storm is coming to Central America with these three factors: demographics, automation, and climate change. So I also think that this challenge can be countered in that there is a window of opportunity in agriculture. But we need to beware that we are running out of time. We need to create those jobs before the kettle explodes. We need resources that should be properly applied at the micro level to really improve the livelihoods of those people and create those jobs. So I would invite everybody who would like to contribute to the cause to act swiftly before the storm arrives. I apologize for my English, it's very rusty now. And I hope that everybody was able to follow and didn't fall asleep during the presentation. Thank you.
Fantastic, Francisco. Your English is fantastic, and it's much better than my Spanish. And thank you for that terrific overview. For our listeners, and I see that some of you have already figured out that there's the opportunity to ask questions by selecting a button at the bottom of your screen, Q&A. So please post your questions, written questions there. I will try to get to as many of those as possible in our remaining time. I'll read those to Francisco, and he and I will one or the other, or both of us will do our best to answer those questions. I'll start with a question that I have, Francisco, for you while we wait for a few others to come through through our tool here. And my question is if you could just describe a little more what role the governments do play in Central America to promote sustainable agriculture and promote some of the changes that you were describing in your presentation.
Well, I think that the basic help that the policies of the governments focus more on the standard macro stability environment. They want to make sure that we have no inflation, and we have no devaluations, I think, and that's okay. But they are leaving a lot to the marketplace, apart from infrastructure, building roads and even rural roads, and building them with better criteria now, protecting them from excessive water and making them more resilient to climate change. Apart from that, the extension of electricity to the rural areas has been expanding in Central America. That has been very useful, but still they cannot reach the farthest corners of where the poorest people live. And there, things like solar energy facilitated by community organizations could make a change. I think that besides that, there are some government banks, some national banks that provide credit, but mostly to farmers, because working with peasants uh, appears to be very expensive for bankers in general. And you know, private bankers prefer to finance consumer goods and, and credit cards for consumers instead of moving into a more risky area of agricultural production, of rural production.
Mhm.
So that's the environment where we are.
Yeah, in your last point there is an important one for our listening audience to understand, is that there are a range of farmers in countries like Nicaragua. There are large-scale industrial farms similar to those in the United States that are growing things like plantains and sugarcane, peanuts. And then there are the farmers that Dr. Mayorga was describing and that are served by Sustanica. And these are the sustenance farmers. They tend to have a hectare or two of land, maybe supplemented with some additional land that they rent, and they are essentially growing crops to feed their cattle if they have a few cows, and more importantly, to feed their families. And sometimes they'll have a little surplus to take to a local market. But generally, these sustenance farmers are on the edge, and they are the ones that are not directly served by the banks, or certainly by the international development banks, or even by the local banks in countries like Nicaragua.
Well, the international development banks do little things, you know, they pay lip service to this problem, but they focus on the larger issues of development. That means that really, you know, taking care of the base of the pyramid is is a challenge that they have a great difficulty to tackle. And international development banks have become gradually more and more irrelevant for the poor. They are more concentrated on modernizing some sectors of the society, of the business sector, helping the private sector to invest and so forth. And that is positive, but I am especially concerned about the situation of the poor peasants, and who are more than 25% of our population. Let me tell you a little something about cattle. When I said agriculture and I said farming, I should have included cattle raising, which has a lot of potential also, could benefit a lot from harvesting water and from improved practices. And also they could benefit a lot from small agribusiness undertakings. You see, collecting milk, for instance, and pasteurizing it at the farm level or at the community level could be very valuable. Also teaching them to produce good cheese with good practices, and also packing that cheese, packing it well in such a way that it will be able to come into the marketplace efficiently. Those are little things that could have a big impact in the livelihoods of those people.
Excellent point. So we have a few more questions that have come in, and so I'm just going to read these to you, Francisco, and we can both jointly try to answer the ones that that require an answer. But the first says, "Thank you, Dr. Mayorga. Very interesting presentation. Can the problem be resolved using the marketplace? Do you see opportunities for cooperation between governments, NGOs, and development banks?"
Well, tough question indeed. I think that the marketplace has resolved a lot of problems for a lot of people. But we have to be concerned about those people who are being left behind. And those people who are being left behind cannot really survive in the marketplace. The marketplace is a very wild place. It's a place where there are many people taking advantage. You know, the big fish eating the small fish, and taking advantage of every opportunity they can grab. And then the poorest of the poor are at a disadvantage. So we really need champions for those people. We need people who could contribute with them in terms of organization, in terms of technology, techniques, better practices, and so forth. And then they could be strengthened to face the marketplace. I think that community organizations with cooperatives and this kind of arrangements are a way of facing that fourth challenge that has always been a part of the storm, which is the marketplace. We need to organize the poor to survive and to prosper in the marketplace. The marketplace is not capable of generating prosperity for all. It generates a lot of prosperity to the few, some prosperity to the middle classes, and very little prosperity to the base of the pyramid. And that's where we have the opportunity to contribute and to act.
And I guess what I'd add to that is that I think there's a real challenge for the peasants, the very poorest of the poor, and Francisco described one of those challenges, which is creating a product that brings a little more value in the market, whether that's proper packaging for cheese, or actually creating brand recognition for products. These things are beyond the capacity of these small sustenance farmers. And the challenge is even deeper. In many cases, these farmers have no transportation besides their animals. So getting their product to a market, which can be miles away, is a very significant challenge. And these are different aspects of what the Sostenica program attempts to address by providing transportation and other services to these small farmers that they don't otherwise have access to.
Yeah, that's a wise comment to make at this point.
Next question that I have is the capacity for technical assistance already sufficient in Central America, or does there need to be more training of professionals? And I believe this is in reference to the technical support for farmers.
Yeah, the governments have some units that are making some efforts, but are completely insufficient. You see, the size of the challenge is huge. We are talking about more than 10 million people living in the rural areas who need to benefit from technical assistance. So we need thousands of people with enough training to go there and provide the assistance needed to improve practices and to develop the opportunities that are around, that may be around in the marketplace. And we also need a little change in the approach. The training of many technicians has focused on the individual farmer, on individualistic practices. But when you have a small producer, small farmer, a peasant with small unit of production, he won't be able to take advantage of those strategies. It is necessary to add forces with other producers in order to have the scale that will be appropriate for that. So we need to know not only about seeds and about better practices in that sense, but also about social practices that allow people to learn how to work together. That is, I think, essential.
It's a great point. And I would add that the universities in Nicaragua in particular, and that's really the only country I can specifically comment on, are actually have quite good agriculture programs, agroecology. Much of our staff comes from those universities, and they come in very well trained. And there are other organizations that provide supplemental specialized education programs. There's a couple organizations that do biointensive agriculture in Nicaragua and offer training. So there are many resources available, but I think I would say that there are more people who need those resources or need access to those resources and don't have the capacity to take advantage of them. And that's usually a financial limitation that limits their ability to get that training. Or a time limitation. But yes, there are some very capable people in Nicaragua, very a strong farming community in Nicaragua, and a very strong university system, but the resources are limited. They don't have a deep extension service, as you may be aware exists in the United States, and that's one of the gaps that Sostenica tries to fill.
Well, in fact, if I could add something to that remark.
Please.
You see, one of the advantages that Costa Rica had that gave it the possibility to lead the development process in Central America was the fact that during the revolution of Pepe Figueres, they organized the cooperatives. So they managed to develop this spirit of cooperation among small farmers and peasants. And also, they also were able to send people who had good training to the rural areas. In fact, it was an advantage for Costa Rica that it is very small, so people could go from the city to the rural area and come back to their hometown. It's not like Nicaragua, which is very wide, very extensive. And there is a social problem involved in university training, which is that it's the same that as when people come from our countries to study in the United States. They come and they are fascinated by the quality of life, and they decide to stay here, so we don't benefit from the training they got. The same happens at the national level. People come from the rural areas to the city. They get used to the way of life of the city, and then even though they have a very good training, they don't want to go back to the community. So we need to change the approach. We need to develop small training centers in the rural areas themselves and provide the right amount of training for the young people there, for those who are capable, such a way that they are not, taking off their own land, their own people, and that they stay there and generate benefits for their communities instead of moving to the city and forgetting about them. I don't know how this sounds, but I really, uh, I'm right now in the United States just because I have to. But when I came here, I was committed to going back to Nicaragua and doing what I could for my people, and I did that. At the end of my life, they asked me to come here to serve Central America, and that's what I'm doing. But I would really rather be in my country trying to help my own people directly. And that's the principle that guides my comments.
That's great. And you sure that isn't only because of the weather here in the Northeast?
Excuse me?
Are you sure that's not only because of the weather here in the Northeast?
Well, I have had enough winters now, but not only, it's not only the winter.
Yeah, absolutely.
The fact that I am not, I don't feel that I'm optimizing what I do if I'm away from my town.
You miss home. We have a few more questions.
Listen, excuse me. It's not nostalgia, Joe. It's a commitment to people. It's not the same thing.
And it's a very important commitment, and we need more people who have that commitment, absolutely.
And we need to instill that spirit in the young. Yeah, I see many people coming to the United States and deciding to stay because they like it here, and I don't blame them. But they should really prefer to go back if we are going to benefit from U.S. education in our countries.
Absolutely. There's a few quick questions here that I can answer that I think would be of interest to the full audience. One is, can we provide a link to the presentation? And the answer to that is yes, there will be. The entire presentation will be posted, and a link will be shared later on. We do not have we haven't translated this into Spanish, but it's something that we've thought about doing, and that so I'd say that's a possibility, but there's no immediate plan to do so. Next question that I had, Francisco, that would involve each of us says, you mentioned the miracle of water management, also the high mineral quality of soils in the region. Are there other practices that can be implemented to improve the biological quality of the soils that would, at the same time, capture carbon in the soils?
Well, that's a better question for an agronomist. I am not a specialist in soil management, but I think that yes, science has developed a lot of possibilities. I am not sure, for instance, that we use what was the medieval standard practice of using manure to fertilize the soil, for instance, simply because peasants don't know about it. And we could improve the quality of the soils just by doing that. There are also some crops that help fix nitrogen in the soil, like growing beans. And I think that rotating crops can help improve the quality of the soils too. There may be other practices. I know, for instance, in planting, that as we renew the plantation every year, we have to leave the trunks and the leaves on the soil so that the soil keeps improving as time passes. So yes, I think that there are many possibilities, but maybe you, Joe, can say something more illustrated than I can.
You know, that's a good overview, and for this question came in as an anonymous question, and I'm happy to talk with anyone in the group who's interested further in this topic. But I would say that there are several things that are being done now and could be done to a larger extent in the country, and they range from some of the items that Francisco mentioned. Just simply reducing the amount of tillage that happens is a way to retain more carbon in the soil, build your soil structure, and retain the biological, the living organisms in that soil. We also do things like intercropping, where you're mixing in crops of different types. And then there's, because cattle are fairly common, doing silvopasture is another way to increase the amount of carbon in the soils in Nicaragua and in Latin America. So there are many approaches that are being taken. They often aren't done specifically to maximize the carbon in the soils, but they could be done more intentionally for that purpose. And that's actually of great interest to Sostenica and to many other folks down there. And again, for anyone interested in this topic, happy to take that offline and discuss it further. The next question is, it sounds like Sostenica is doing good work at the scale you can, but the scale needs to be much larger. Is there a vision for working with others to increase the scale of this work? And Francisco, this sounds like it's more for me, so
Yeah, sure.
I'll respond, but feel free to add. And I agree. The scale at which we operate is way too small for the scale of the problem we are attempting to address. And part of the solution is working with others. Partnerships are critical to solving these problems. And those partnerships were alluded to by another questioner who was talking about partnerships among the government and development banks and NGOs. And I would add universities. That's the group that we partner with most frequently, as well as other NGOs, to bring the expertise and the resources to bear. So it's a long way of saying that absolutely there is this concept of working with others to scale up the solutions to these problems. And fundamentally, it has to be addressed at a much larger scale, involving organizations like development banks and governments, not necessarily directly on the ground, but with financial expertise and other resources need to be brought to bear to address what is a very profound and widespread issue. So I don't know, Francisco, if you want to add anything to that.
Well, I really think that there are some possibilities that Sostenica should explore, maybe at the multilateral investment fund and other funds like that. You could find echo to your innovations and your contribution to this cause. I think that it is a possibility, but additionally, you have to find a way to mobilize the young, that they could not only contribute financially, the millennials, but also could come to see directly in the field the impact of what they can do for other people. I think that I know you've been trying. I know you try hard, but I don't know. There are new technologies there. I don't know if you're using them, but I think that technologies for raising funds. But I think that I know that you're very efficient in the use of resources, and that you apply the resources very, very effectively. But you need to mobilize more resources. You deserve, I mean, you deserve it, and the people need it. I think this is important.
Yep, I agree. More resources need to be brought to bear, absolutely. Next question is, correct me if I'm wrong, but from my visits to Nicaragua, it appears there are two types of farmers: subsistence small farms and very large corporate farms. I did not see very many middle-sized farms. In simple terms, why is that?
That's a political economy question. I'm afraid that the concentration process of land tenancy keeps slowly going on. We had the same situation before the Sandinista revolution in the 80s. The Sandinista revolution did take a lot of land from idle landowners and distributed it to the peasants, and that helped a lot. And also during that time, cooperatives were organized, and the government tried to make an effort, but the war frustrated it all. So then, when in 1990 the government changed, the following government, I served only in the government for 1 year because I didn't think that they were going to go in the right direction. They abandoned those policies, those strategies, and the old large farmers, the old large landowners came back and began to buy the land from the cooperatives. You see, in that time, the bankers, for instance, wouldn't finance cooperatives. They wouldn't give credit to small farmers, to peasants, but they would really finance the old farmers to help them buy the land from the peasants at a very cheap price. So the process of concentration of property in the rural areas began very quickly, and it's been going on, as always, forever. But if we strengthen the small peasants and the small farmers with considerations as the ones we've been discussing here, I think that we can also stop that process, or at least slow it down, and help the entire of the society to generate prosperity for all and not just for the few.
Mm-hmm. Great, thanks, Francis. That's a thorough answer and one that I couldn't add anything to. But we do have a few more, and we have about 5 minutes left. So let me get to at least one of these. Is the agricultural yield potential similar among the Central American countries? Francisco, you showed a chart in which Nicaragua lagged behind its neighbors significantly. Are all factors controllable, or could there be other uncontrollable factors like climate or soil quality in the lower producing countries like Nicaragua?
I think that all countries can improve. The fact that we have lower productivity, I mean, less than Costa Rica, which is the benchmark we should try to approach, is derives from the fact that we have many poor people in the rural areas who have not had access to the opportunities that we are talking about, that, of which water harvest and better practices are just two factors. I know that there are many other factors that could be introduced. I think that even Costa Rica could benefit from some changes in agriculture, but they are doing very well in there and in other sectors. So, and they are a very advanced country by the Central American standards. So, but in Honduras, which is the second poorest country in the hemisphere, you know that the two poorest countries in the hemisphere are Honduras and Nicaragua. And well, Honduras and Nicaragua could quickly try to approach the benchmark of Costa Rica in the next few years. And I think that should present a change. But yes, I think that the opportunities are there, that the types of soils, vary from region to region. And these are micro questions. But in general, clearly, there is no reason why we shouldn't be as well off as Costa Rica in general terms in agriculture.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, that's my sense as well. Is certainly the soils are of equivalent quality, and obviously there's some areas where soils are better or worse, and quite a bit of variability within a country. But overall, the soil quality is very comparable. Rainfall, maybe it's a little more seasonal in Nicaragua, but I think it's more these factors that Francisco is describing that are causing the big difference in production among those countries. So it's now just about 3 o'clock, and we have still 5 unanswered questions. I will commit to getting written answers out to everyone, but everybody should feel free to reach out directly to me. And if it's a question that requires some input from Francisco, I will reach out to him and see if he can help us get an answer to you. I did want to thank everyone for your participation this afternoon. This is our first in a series. We'll be doing one a month for the next 2 months. And if we continue to have audience interest, we will extend beyond that. But again, I want to thank you all for your participation this afternoon, and have a great remainder of the day. Thanks.
Thank you all.